I am continuing in my reading. What I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I am continuing reading in a chronological order, according to event, not according to publication or volume, so I'm skipping around a bit as I move along. We continue in our reading. We're reading in the Gospels right now. We're right at the end. We've read, the triumphal entry, Last Supper, arrest in Gethsemane, the trials, and we are at the crucifixion. We have read the story of the crucifixion in Matthew and Mark, a lot of great stuff in those Gospels, and in the Joseph Smith translations. A lot of new information, or a lot of extra information that had been lost was restored. Now we're going to read this in Luke, chapter 23, verses 25 through 56. And again, we will be doing the Joseph Smith translation in a separate video. Let us read Luke. We'll be starting in verse 26. And as they led him away, they laid hold upon one Simon, a Cyrenian, coming out of the country, and on him they laid the cross, that he might bear it after Jesus. And there followed him a great company of people and of women, which also bewailed and lamented him. But Jesus, turning unto them, said, Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming, in the which they shall say, Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bare, and the paps which never gave suck. Then shall they begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, Cover us. For if they do these things in a green tree, what shall be done in the dry? And there were also 2 other malefactors led with him to be put to death. And when they were come to the place which is called Calvary, there they crucified him, and the malefactors, one on the right hand and the other on the left. Then said Jesus, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they parted his raiment and cast lots. And the people stood beholding, and the rulers also with them derided him, saying, He saved others. Let him save himself if he be Christ, the chosen of God. And the soldiers also mocked him, coming to him, and offering him vinegar, and saying, If thou be the King of the Jews, save thyself. And a subscription also was written over him in letters of Greek and Latin and Hebrew, This is the King of the Jews. We get no mention here of the torment of Christ. Smacking him with a reed, the crown of thorns, putting on the purple. None of that is mentioned here. They release Barabbas, and the next thing we know, they're carrying him off to the hill. Now we do have mention of Simon the Cyrenian. Doesn't say he's the father of Alexander and Rufus, but we have mention of him, so he's mentioned in all 3 Gospels. But Luke does not mention that tormenting of Christ before bringing him out to be crucified. He's just brought out to be crucified. But Luke is the one that mentions Christ's prayer for the Romans. When he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He's talking about the Roman soldiers who are just following orders. Pilate gave the high priests the authority to have Christ crucified. And so when they ordered his crucifixion, the soldiers just carried out what wouldn't be generally standard practice for a crucifixion. Now, some of it might have been a little extra, like the crown of thorns, but they were just following orders, and Christ is asking for their forgiveness. He's not asking God to forgive the Jews. The Pharisees and the scribes and the high priests, they all know what they're doing. He's already told them that they're sons of perdition. He's asking for forgiveness of the Roman soldiers. But everything else we read is the same as we read in Matthew and Mark. So now we pick it up in verse 39. And one of the malefactors which were hanged railed on him, saying, If thou be Christ, save thyself and us. But the other answering rebuked him, saying, Dost not thou fear God, seeing thou art in the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds, but this man hath done nothing amiss. And he said unto Jesus, Lord, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom. And Jesus said unto him, Verily I say unto thee, Today shalt thou be with me in paradise. And it was about the 6th hour, and there was a darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour. And the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was rent in the midst. Now very briefly, since I talked about it with both Matthew and Mark, the rending of the veil is not to say that temples are no longer needed, but to say that the temple under the Mosaic law is no longer recognized by God. What? Are you going to get on the camera, or are you going to stay out? You want to be up on the camera? Say hi. Say hi. Nope, I got you. Okay then, out and stay out. Briefly, the tearing of the veil, as I mentioned in Matthew and Mark, is not to say that temples are no longer needed, but to say that the Mosaic temple, the temple that was made for the Mosaic law, is no longer recognized. As Christ said, you do not put new wine into old bottles. However, let us talk about this thief. Now, in Luke, he just says malefactor. They're called thieves in Matthew and Mark. But what does Christ mean by, today shalt thou be with me in paradise? Now, we know you can't be in paradise if you are not baptized. You are not, even in the Spirit, you have the Spirit prison and the Spirit paradise. Anybody who's not baptized goes to prison. They don't go to paradise. So how is he going to be in paradise today? Well, first of all, I do point out that we don't know that he wasn't baptized. John the Baptist started baptizing 3 years earlier. He could have been baptized. We don't know. But whether he was or not, remember that to God, one day is 1,000 years on the earth. And so this man, though he is dying now, the work will be done for him vicariously for the work of the salvation of the dead, through baptism for the dead. He will receive his baptism and he will enter paradise. And it will happen today, meaning within that 1,000-year period. So sometime between the birth of Christ and the year 1000, this man was baptized. We now continue with verse 46. And when Jesus had cried with a loud voice, he said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And having said thus, he gave up the ghost. Now when the centurion saw what was done, he glorified God, saying, Certainly this was a righteous man. And all the people that came together to that sight, beholding the things which were done, smote their breasts and returned. And all his acquaintance, and the women that followed him from Galilee, stood afar off, beholding these things. And behold, there was a man named Joseph, a counselor, and he was a good man and a just. The same had not consented to the counsel and the deed of them. He was of Arimathæa, a city of the Jews, who also himself waited for the kingdom of God. This man went unto Pilate and begged the body of Jesus. And he took it down and wrapped it in linen, and laid it in a sepulchre that was hewn in stone, wherein never man before was laid. And that day was the preparation, and the Sabbath drew on. And the women also which came with him from Galilee followed after. And behold, the sepulchre, and how his body was laid. And they returned and prepared spices and ointments, and rested the Sabbath day according to the commandment. Now note here, according to Luke, he says, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. Now, he didn't really say anything. What he said is not written in Matthew or Mark, except in the Joseph Smith translation. In the Joseph Smith translation of Matthew, he says, Father, it is finished, thy will is done. In Luke here, he says, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. He probably said both. He probably said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. It is done. It is finished, thy will is done. He probably said both, but it's different recollections. So, other than that, there's really nothing else different here. So we're going to leave it here, and we will look at the Joseph Smith translation in our next video, so I will see you there.